Right. That was a treat to see Daniel Nahmod this morning. I wasn't expecting that. I love him. Today, our speaker is Reverend Dr. Judy Morley, and I want to say a few things before we get started. She is a nationally recognized speaker, author, and coach. Her years of experience vary from being an advertising agency owner to a college professor to an executive to a franchise owner, and of course, an ordained minister. Dr. Morley holds a PhD in American history and a master's degree in consciousness studies. She is an entrepreneur who currently lives in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And I hope that you will all join us after the service at cslmidtown.org on the Zoom link to meet Dr. Morley and to participate in a discussion of her talk if you have any questions for her. It's a great way to connect to other people in our community as well. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Judy Morley. So glad you're here today.
Thank you, Judy. So glad to be here. So glad to be here. So the title of my talk today is Denial Ain't Just a River in Egypt. Denial ain't just a river in Egypt. Now, I use the word ain't ironically because we all know that ain't a word. But it speaks to what I want to say about denial. Denial is a bad word in our culture today, right? We have figured out that when we're in denial, that's a bad thing. And that comes from the recovery movement. Denial is when we deny what's really happening around us. And we particularly, I think in the specific context I'm talking about, we deny that we have a problem. So that's where the word, the modern word denial comes from. But denial is a key part in spiritual growth. Our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, said that denial was really the first step of a spiritual mind treatment, not the denial from the recovery movement where we pretend that we don't have a problem or that things aren't bad. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk a lot about that. But denial in the fact that we deny that circumstances around us have any power over us. As a matter of fact, Dr. Ernest Holmes's teacher, a woman named Emma Curtis Hopkins, who taught from the 1880s to the 1920s, she actually said that the very first thing we have to do to manifest the life we want is acknowledge that there's good for us and we ought to have it. But then the second step, number 2, is that we deny that there is any power that can keep us from our good. We have to literally deny it. As a matter of fact, I have here a list of denials that Emma Curtis Hopkins suggests that we tell ourselves every day. Before I read this, I am sure that if you have been to CSL Midtown or any of the Centers for Spiritual Livings, you've heard that we don't want to say what we don't want. We don't want to deny. Our brain doesn't hear no. I'm going to talk more about that. I think that what has happened is we've taken that a little bit too far, because I think that in denying conditions, we set ourselves up for something called a spiritual bypass. So we have to actually look at the condition and deny it objectively. So here are Emma Curtis Hopkins' denials. We have to every day remind ourselves there is no evil. There is no matter. Everything is made of God. There is no absence of life, substance, or intelligence. There is no thing to hate. And there is no sin, sickness, or death. So we have to remind ourselves of that. What I've found in my own life, and you guys may be the same, is that we really do believe in these things. We believe in lack. We believe in sin, sickness, or death. We believe that we don't have enough. We believe it. And in trying to manifest the life we want, which is why we're all here, we want more happiness, we want more peace, we want more love, we want more prosperity, we pretend to ourselves that we believe that there is none of that. And yet we operate as if there is. So how do we use denials without being in denial? That's kind of the crux, right? That's the paradox, if you will. We have to learn how to deny that these things have power over us without allowing ourselves to wallow in the condition, but we do need to acknowledge it. Hence, denial ain't just a river in Egypt. And to tie it into this idea of giant gentleness, this is actually a very gentle process. It's a very natural process. Many people, myself included, you don't have to, out yourself if you're one of them too, but I'm pretty sure I'm not alone. We struggle. We struggle with this because we want to say that we don't acknowledge that there is evil, or that we don't acknowledge that there is poverty or death or whatever. And yet we see it around us and we can't quite reconcile those two things. What ends up happening is when we set an intention till we deny that it has no power over us, we end up sending out different signals to the universe. So we're sending out the signal, I want my prosperity, I want my love, I want my good. At the same time, we're saying, I don't believe that can happen. Again, how do we rectify that? It's a very gentle process. It's a very gentle process. It doesn't have to be the struggle between these two things. And the first thing that you have to do is you have to acknowledge the obvious. That's going to be the basis of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you 3 kind of steps on how do you go from being in denial to productively using denial. The first thing is you have to acknowledge the obvious. I am amazed at my own capability and many of my colleagues' capabilities to deny the obvious. Now, I know where this comes from. This comes from a belief that we have to deny the condition. And Ernest Holmes does say we have to deny the condition. But what he really says is that we have to deny that the condition has any power over us. There's a great joke. Here we go. A priest, a rabbi, and a religious science minister are out playing golf. And while the 3 of them are playing golf, a huge lightning strike comes and strikes right on the green where all 3 of them are, and all 3 of them die. They come to after their experience and they realize that they're in hell. The rabbi says, how can this be? We don't even believe in hell. Jews don't even believe in hell. I've lived a good life. I've been ethical. I don't understand how this can be. The priest says, no, there must be some mistake. I went to confession. I did all of the sacraments. I have kept my soul clear of any mortal or venial sins. I can't be here. I don't understand. We have to go talk to God and find out what's happening. And the rabbi and the priest set off to find out where the mistake is. Meanwhile, the religious science minister is standing there going, I'm not here and it's not hot. I'm not here and it's not hot. I'm not here and it's not hot. That's unhealthy denial. That's unhealthy denial. We don't want to be in that kind of denial. We have to acknowledge the obvious at the same time that we acknowledge that it has no power over us. In one of his CDs, Live Again 2, I believe, Ernest Holmes says that you can't look at someone with a broken leg, see them laying on the ground with a broken leg, and say, just get up and walk. Now, I think we should be able to do that. There's stories in the Bible of Jesus's miracles. And, if we believe in miracles, we think we should do all that. It comes from a level of belief. And until we have the level of belief that, a Jesus or a Buddha did, we probably need to help this person get their legs set. The same time, we realize that this doesn't change who they are. This doesn't change their goals. This doesn't change their plans. This doesn't change their ability to do absolutely everything they want to do. It just means they have a broken leg. So we have to acknowledge the obvious. So ask yourself, how often do you acknowledge the obvious? And how often do you pretend that it's not happening? Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I do know where this comes from. It comes from number 2 in my points after acknowledge the obvious, and that is feeling your feelings. We learn pretty early on that there are certain feelings that we don't like, that are uncomfortable, they make us jittery, or they create anxiety, or they cause us to be overly angry, or just they're uncomfortable. We also learn growing up that there are certain feelings that are inappropriate. I think there are some gender differences here, not always, not 100%, but I know for women, I coach a lot of women, and they're usually told that being angry when they're little is inappropriate because it's not feminine for women to get angry. I also know from coaching men that it's showing crying or sadness, that big boys don't cry. So we learn that those are inappropriate. And so rather than feeling them and managing them, we dissociate from them, we disconnect from them, and we pretend that they're not there. But when we don't feel all of our feelings, what happens is that our body builds a protective self. Remember, when we're trying to get the life we want, when we're trying to manifest, we don't manifest what we want. We manifest what we vibrate. We manifest what our subconscious and conscious mind together put out into the universe. So if we have feelings that we've buried that we don't even know are there, and our conscious mind is saying, I want prosperity, I want peace, I want love, and our subconscious mind is going, I don't even know those exist. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong. But way down under here, I don't feel worthy because I was told I wasn't worthy, or I was told I was inappropriate, or I was told that I was wrong. Then we're fighting against ourselves. We can't get what we want. It doesn't come into sync. It always reminds me of, at the movie theater, I don't know if they still do this because it's been a while since I've actually been in a theater, but when they test the sound, it would be all cacophonous and very noisy. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, it's like we're trying to get to the, oh, but we've got all of these different messages going out there in the universe, and it can't come to us. What we want can't come to us in that beautiful clarity because we're not feeling all of our feelings. Ernest Holmes was very clear. He said, it's not the thought, but the feeling back of it that does the work. So you can say all you want, I am prosperous, I am love, I am peaceful. You can say that all you want, and you can think it in your mind. But if in your heart you're feeling poverty, or you're scared about money, or you've got anxiety about relationships, you're not going to get what you want. You're not going to manifest because you're sending mixed signals to the universe. So what do you do about it? Well, this is the kind of icky part. You have to feel all your feelings. You have to go back and you have to recognize when you're feeling anxiety, recognize when you're feeling fear, recognize when you're feeling sadness. And instead of pushing it away or using some sort of coping mechanism like getting too busy or eating, drinking, napping, watching TV, playing on your phone, whatever it is, instead of doing whatever that coping mechanism is, you have to stop, be still, and feel it. Now, it doesn't take very long to feel. It takes about 90 seconds to actually ride the wave of a feeling. About 90 seconds. That's not that long. But we've been so scared to feel certain feelings for so much of our lives that we push it off. We say no. And we distract ourselves with something else. The other thing that we sometimes do instead of feel our feelings is we allow our brains to override our hearts because the feeling is too frightening. So there's a wonderful story about this that comes from the teacher, John Randolph Price. I don't know. John Randolph Price died in 2017. He's obviously not still on the speaking circuit. But back in the olden days, when I first started in New Thought, John Randolph Price was very prevalent. His books were very much read and published and spoken about. You might have seen his little 40-day prosperity plan book. It's a little book, but he tells this wonderful story about his own journey to prosperity. He had a career in marketing, and he had decided that he wanted to go full-time doing spiritual growth work. He'd written a couple books, and he wanted to close down his agency and start a nonprofit called the Cordis Foundation. But he didn't have the money. and he didn't know where the money was going to come from. And he had a specific dollar amount that he needed. So he was going to use that specific dollar amount, or look for that specific dollar amount. So he prayed for that specific dollar amount. Now, we've all done that. We know what we need. We get very clear. We pray for it, or we send intention, or we say an affirmation. We get there. Great. So a few days later, John Randolph Price is walking out of his office, and two big men come up and kind of get on either side of him and escort him to this big limousine and ask him to please get in. Someone wants to have a conversation with him. And he feels like he's out of some sort of gangster movie, right? So he gets in the back, and they take him to like an old warehouse. They escort him in, and he says there's a guy behind the desk, sounds like the Godfather, who pretty much makes him an offer he can't refuse. And what the man wants is he wants John Randolph Price to write a book. And he's going to offer him the exact amount of money that John Randolph Price has prayed for, right? Unfortunately, the book was a book that was supposed to be written to exonerate a convicted killer. I don't know how many of you know the story of the actor Woody Harrelson, but Woody Harrelson's father, Charles Harrelson, was a hired hitman. You can Google this. It's all on there, in Texas. And he was convicted of killing a federal judge. And this man was asking John Randolph Price to write a book that exonerated Woody Harrelson's father. Well, he'd been convicted and was already in jail. And John Randolph Price just didn't feel good about this. His feelings were saying, don't do it. Don't do it. This is going to be trouble. But his mind was saying, this is the exact amount of money you prayed for. This is answered prayer. You said that you wanted X number of dollars, and this man is offering you X number of dollars, and all you have to do is write a book, which you've done before. So you should do this. So John Randolph Price has the presence of mind to not say yes right then, to say he needs to check his schedule and things like that. He leaves. He sits with it, and he's got this fight. Can you relate? Can any of you relate? You pray for something, and the opportunity appears exactly like you prayed for, but it feels awful. I've done it so many times. Most of the time I go with what my brain says and do it anyway and regret it. Luckily, John Randolph Price, after lots of prayer and consideration, turned it down. He had had a dream that if he did this, he would be killed. So he says no. But now he says, I don't know what to do. I don't know how I'm going to get this money. And there's just got to be another way. He was invited the next week to speak at a small church. He got there and he started talking a little bit about what his prepared remarks were. And then all of a sudden he was inspired to talk about the Cordis Foundation and what he wanted to do. And he kind of threw his notes out the window and just spoke freely about the Cordis Foundation. And by the end of the talk, he had people donating money to the new Cordis Foundation in exactly the amount he needed. And this time it came from the heart. So you have to feel all of your feelings in order to get to what you want. You have to feel your feelings, resolve them, and recognize that those negative feelings have no power over you. And then the third thing you have to do is you have to follow the breadcrumbs. So after you've acknowledged the obvious and felt your feelings, then follow the breadcrumbs and follow what you know to be right, just like John Randolph Price did. There's a theory in leadership circles that we talk about a lot. I do a lot of leadership coaching with people in the Fortune 500, and I talk to them about something called the Stockdale paradox. And I find that sometimes when we're in science mind, we find it difficult to sit inside the Stockdale paradox. So the Stockdale paradox comes from Admiral James Stockdale. James Stockdale was the highest ranking prisoner of war during the Vietnam War. He was in the infamous Hanoi Hilton for 10 years. And as the highest ranking POW, it was his job to maintain the morale and the organization of the men in the Hanoi Hilton. Now, of course, this wasn't an easy task. They're all prisoners. They're living under the worst psychological, physical, painful conditions. But he gets out after 10 years. He's rescued, comes back to the United States, actually runs for vice president. So fast forward to the early 2000s, and the author Jim Collins is writing a book called Good to Great. And he interviews James Stockdale. And the first thing Collins asks Stockdale is, so who didn't make it? Who didn't make it? Like, who did you find in your experience with all these men who didn't make it? And Stockdale says something that's absolutely shocking to me. He says, the ones who didn't make it were the optimists. What? Don't we teach that we should always be optimistic? That if we acknowledge something's not working, that we're being pessimistic and negative and that's wrong? No, no, no. Stockdale says that it's the optimists that didn't make it. And of course, Jim Collins says, what? And Stockdale says, yeah, because they couldn't look at the reality. They would say, oh, no big deal. We'll be out of here by Christmas. And Christmas would come and go. And they'd say, oh, no big deal. We'll be out of here by Easter. And Easter would come and go. And they'd say, oh, no big deal. We'll be out of here by 4th of July. And 4th of July would come and go. And they were still there. And Stockdale said, they ultimately died of a broken heart. So, of course, Jim Collins asked the obvious follow-up question. So what do you do if not be optimistic? And this is where we get the Stockdale paradox. You have to have a bedrock faith that you're going to survive in the end. You have to have a bedrock faith that the thing you want, whether it's love or prosperity or relationship or whatever, is out there for you. At the same time, you have a realistic assessment of where you are. You have to understand how bad it is, but know that no matter how bad it is, you can still get to where you want in the end. And how do you do that? You follow the breadcrumbs. You follow the feelings that get you to the feeling tone of that alignment. So I had a personal experience with this almost 26 years ago now. I was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. I've written about it. I've talked about it. I had about a 20% chance of survival. And I was an optimist. When I was first diagnosed, I kept saying, it's just a bump in the road. That was my little catchphrase, just a bump in the road. It's just a bump in the road. But as every new revelation came, first I just noticed I had a lump in my neck. Well, that was bad. But then I noticed that I had other symptoms. Then they did tests and found that the cancer was everywhere, including my bone marrow. And then I got an allergic reaction to the chemo drugs, and we had to modify my regimen to be less effective. And then I had to have a Mediport put in. And then I had an infection in the Mediport. It's just like one thing. And every time I got a new curveball thrown at me, I said, oh, it's just a bump in the road. Until the last one, when I got the bacterial infection, and I was actually told to go home and get my affairs in order, because most people who die of cancer don't actually die of the cancer, but die of a related infection. And since I only had a 20% chance to begin with, and now I've got this infection, I was a goner. I remember I had a 3-year-old daughter. I was only 33 years old, had a 3-year-old daughter. And I remember going home and I was cross-stitching a stocking for her, a Christmas stocking, so that she would have something to remember me by. And, but I had not acknowledged yet how bad it could be. But as I cross-stitched the stocking, I remember just feeling like I can't fight anymore. I'm exhausted. It doesn't even feel honest. I feel like I'm lying with my little, oh, it's just a bump in the road, because it didn't feel like a bump in the road. It felt like disaster. I had suddenly a realistic assessment of how bad it was, which was I was going to die. I remember sitting in my rocking chair with my cross stitching and just crying and saying, okay, God, I don't care. I really am. I'm okay. Either way, I would like to live. My intention is to live, to see this little girl grow up, to be part of her life. That's my intention. But truly, I understand how bad it is. So I'm just going to let you show me the next step. But I'm done fighting. I'm done fighting. I get it. I could die. I acknowledge it. I've made my peace with it. But I'd prefer to live. The next day I had a CAT scan. There was no evidence of disease. There hasn't been any evidence of disease since December of 1998, which was when I had my last test. So that's coming up on 26 years. So denial. Denial ain't just a river in Egypt. How do we go from being in denial to using denials? First, acknowledge the obvious. Acknowledge the obvious. Don't live in denial. If you have a broken leg, go see a doctor. If you're told you're going to die, acknowledge that you could die. If your bank account is empty, don't spend money. Just acknowledge the obvious. And then second, follow your feelings. Feel them all. Feel them all. I know some of them are unpleasant. I know you don't want to feel them. I know that you might have spent a lifetime trying to get rid of them or distract yourself from them. But it is those feelings that will guide you to where you want. It's those feelings that will tell you where to go. And your job then is number 3, follow those breadcrumbs. Follow the breadcrumbs of the feelings. If something feels good and like relief and like I can breathe again, do that. If something feels bad or frightening or conflicted, don't do that. So, denial ain't just a river in Egypt. Deny that there is any power in the universe that can hurt you. There is a power for good and good only. And then deny that the conditions around you that may or may not be a product of your own faulty thinking, they don't have any power over you until you forget that you have to deny their power and embrace the greater power. So let's pray. So I'm just so grateful in this moment to deny that there is any power of evil. There is no evil. There is no lack. There is no sin, sickness, or death. I know this is the truth. I am not afraid to speak those words because I acknowledge they have no power. Saying the word evil does not make evil so. Saying the word poverty does not make poverty so, because what I know at the very core of my being is that there is only one power. There is only one life. Whatever we call it, whatever we think about it, there is only this one power in the universe. And so knowing that there is this one power in the universe, I deny that there is any power that is greater. I deny that there is any power that can overrule or override this divine life that is at the center and core of every single being. We are all manifestations of that one God. We are all manifestations of the good. And that good is calling us forward in every moment. That good is calling us to feel deeply, profoundly, at our very core, that there is good for us and we ought to have it. We deserve to have it. We are worthy of having it. So regardless of what is happening in our lives, regardless of the conditions around us, regardless of the political climate, regardless of the financial climate, regardless of anything that is going on outside of our own feelings, we are one with the good we ought to have. So when something enters into our awareness that makes us feel negative, that makes us feel bad, that makes us feel like we are separate from our good, we stop and we feel it. We look at it. Ernest Holmes says we must look at a thing long enough until it no longer has power over us. So rather than turn away and try to get busy and distract, we look at it and we say, oh, no, 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 no. You are not the truth. You, poverty, are not the truth. You, dissension, are not the truth. You, division, are not the truth. You, separation, are not the truth. Because the truth is there is only one. There is only good, and I ought to have it. And so as we practice this new skill, as we practice this new skill of going from being in denial to using denial, we step into a greater power. We step into a greater awareness of our spiritual beingness. We step into the greater knowing that we are the divine creators of our life in a way that allows us to be powerful, to be centered, not to be fearful beings running from the truth, but standing in the power that there is nothing that the world can throw at us that God can't overcome. And so it's with great gratitude for this knowing. It's with great gratitude for the fact that this is how God is, and that every spiritual teacher across the millennia has told us that this is the nature of the divine, that there is only good. And we feel our way using our heart, feeling our feelings, following the breadcrumbs. we feel our way into that goodness. And as we do that, I know that every condition in our life is healed. And so I just know as we go about our week now that we practice this new skill, we bring it out into the world, we become the beings in the world that we want to see. We transform our own fear-based thoughts and our own fear-based feelings into that feeling of power and connection. And as we do that, we permit everyone around us to do the same. And that is how we impact consciousness and bring on the grand rising of the beloved community. So it is with this knowing that I give such profound thanks that I can just let it be, because I know that all is well. And so it is.